The party was a loud, glittering thing, a testament to my son Richard's particular brand of success. It spilled from the open glass doors of his sprawling minimalist house, across a manicured lawn that looked less like grass and more like a green velvet carpet, and lapped at the edges of a swimming pool, so unnaturally blue it seemed to have stolen its color from a postcard. It was a celebration for my granddaughter, Jessica, who was turning 18. 18. The number itself felt foreign, a high, sharp note in the quiet symphony of my own life. I sat on a cushioned patio chair, a strategic distance from the thumping heart of the music, a glass of iced water sweating onto the small napkin in my hand. From here, I was an observer, a familiar role. I watched Jessica, my granddaughter, a whirlwind of youthful energy and expensive fabric. She was surrounded by a flock of friends, all long limbs, bright laughter, and faces illuminated by the ghostly glow of their phones. They communicated in a language of shared glances and rapid-fire slang that was as indecipherable to me as ancient runes. Richard, my son, moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of a man who owned it all. He was a good man, I knew, but his goodness was of a modern, efficient sort. He expressed his love through extravagant gestures, through providing, through ensuring his family wanted for nothing material. The quieter, more difficult currencies of time and attention were often in short supply. His wife, Catherine, was the perfect complement, a woman whose talent for social orchestration was nothing short of genius. The party was her masterpiece. Every detail, from the artisanal canapes to the blush pink balloons, curated to perfection. I felt like an antique piece of furniture that had been left in a sleek, modern showroom. I did not belong, but I was, by virtue of my position as matriarch, a title that felt both hollow and heavy, a necessary part of the display. The time came for gifts. A mountain of brightly wrapped boxes was piled on a long table. Jessica tore into them with a practiced enthusiasm, her friends oohing and ahing at the designer handbags, the latest electronic gadgets, the gift certificates to expensive stores. Each gift was a confirmation of her place in the world, a world of brands and status and tangible value. My gift was not on the table. It was in a small, velvet-worn box in my handbag. It felt heavy, not with its own weight, but with the weight of its history. When it was my turn, I did not shout across the lawn. I waited for a lull, and then I walked over to her, navigating the small clusters of her friends. "Jessica, dear," I said, my voice quiet amidst the lingering chatter. "This is for you." I opened my handbag and drew out the small, dark blue box. It was not wrapped in shiny paper. The box itself was the wrapping, its nap worn smooth by the hands of 3 generations of women. I opened it for her. Inside, resting on a bed of faded silk, was a locket. It was silver, tarnished by time to a soft, pearlescent gray. It was not adorned with diamonds or gemstones. Its only decoration was a delicate hand-engraved pattern of ivy leaves, their tiny veins worn almost smooth. It had belonged to my mother and her mother before her. "It's very old," I said softly, stating the obvious. "I spent the last month polishing it. The clasp was broken, so I had a jeweler repair it. It's a very special piece." I had also spent 2 weeks searching for the perfect photographs to place inside its tiny frames. On one side, a miniature black and white image of myself as a young woman, holding Richard as a baby. On the other, a photo of Jessica, taken on her first birthday, her face a perfect round moon of innocent joy. It was the story of us, of the unbroken line of love that connected us, captured in a space no bigger than my thumb. Jessica took the box. Her friends craned their necks to see. She looked down at the locket, her perfectly plucked eyebrows drawing together in a faint, confused line. She picked it up. It dangled from her fingers, a relic from another time, another world. "Oh," she said. The word was flat, empty. "Thanks, Grandma. It's very vintage." Melnie ran. One of her friends, a girl with hair the color of cotton candy, leaned in and whispered something in her ear. Jessica's face broke into a quick, embarrassed smile. She let out a small, sharp laugh. "I know, right?" she said to the friend, her voice a stage whisper that was perfectly audible. "It's a little, well, you know." She looked at me, a flicker of what might have been pity in her eyes. "It's sweet, Grandma, really. But it's maybe a little embarrassing. I can't exactly wear this. What would I wear it with?" Embarrassing. The word did not strike me like a slap. It was quieter than that. It was like a key, turning in a lock deep inside me. A lock I hadn't even known was there. It opened a door onto a room filled with 1,000 other small moments. A lifetime of my quiet efforts being gently, thoughtlessly dismissed. My hand-knitted sweaters that were never worn. The family stories she had no patience to hear. The carefully tended garden she never bothered to look at. I watched her father, my son, Richard, standing nearby. He had heard. I saw the flicker of discomfort on his face. He stepped forward, not to defend the gift, not to explain its significance, not to correct his daughter's casual cruelty, but to smooth the social wrinkle. "It's a family heirloom, honey," he said, his voice placating. "It's lovely. Why don't you put it with your other things for safekeeping?" He was managing the moment, de-escalating the potential for unpleasantness. In his world, that was his job. But in that moment, I realized with a sudden startling clarity that he was not just managing his daughter's behavior. He was managing me. He was managing my potential reaction, my potential hurt. I had become another line item in his life to be managed. I looked at Jessica, who had already placed the locket back in its box, and set it aside, her attention now captured by a new, more exciting gift. I offered no reply to Richard. I simply gave a small, quiet nod. I nodded as if to say, "I understand." And I did. I understood everything. The decision formed then. It was not born of anger or a desire for revenge. Anger is a hot, messy emotion, and what I felt was a cold, pure clarity. It was a simple, logical conclusion, like the final line in a mathematical proof. I had been making a long-term, very significant investment in a future that not only did not value my past, but was actively embarrassed by it. The thought was not emotional. It was practical. It was the thought of a prudent, careful investor realizing a fund was profoundly misaligned with its stated goals. I stayed for another hour, a polite, smiling ghost at my granddaughter's feast. When I left, I kissed her on the cheek. She smelled of sugar and expensive perfume. "Thank you for a lovely party," I said. On the drive home, the little velvet box sat on the passenger seat beside me. It felt less like a rejected gift and more like a piece of evidence. The evidence of a fundamental, unbridgeable gap. ... When I arrived home, the house was silent. It did not feel empty. It felt mine. It felt like a place of sanity, a place where things had real, intrinsic weight. A place where a thing was not judged by what it was worth, but by what it meant. My journey began the next morning, not with a packed suitcase, but with a cup of tea and a key. It was a journey into the past, into the quiet, paper-filled archives of my own life. After my quiet breakfast, I walked to the heavy oak bureau that stood in my study. I used a small, ornate silver key to unlock the bottom drawer, a drawer I had not opened in years. It was where I kept the most important things, not financially valuable, but sentimentally priceless. My late husband Thomas's military medals, my own mother's book of pressed flowers, a bundle of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon. And in a corner, I found what I was looking for, a small, velvet-lined case containing the rest of my mother's jewelry. There was the locket's matching silver bracelet and a pair of delicate earrings. They were a set, a trinity. I laid them out on the polished wood of my desk, the locket nestled between them. I ran my finger over the cool, smooth metal. The gift had not just been an object, I realized. It had been an invitation for Jessica to become the next link in a chain, to accept the inheritance of our family story. An invitation she had, with a casual laugh, declined. The physical journey of the day was only a few feet, from that bureau to the sturdy metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. This was where I kept the other side of my life, The practical, the financial, the contractual. I opened the drawer marked FF. Inside, behind, Fidelity and First National Bank, was a thick folder labeled simply, Jessica's Education Fund. I lifted it out. The folder felt dense, heavy with the weight of years of careful planning and sacrifice. I had started it when she was born. Thomas was still alive then, and we had sat at this very desk together, dreaming of the woman she would become. A doctor, perhaps, or a writer, or an art historian. We had envisioned her at a fine university, surrounded by books and ideas, learning about the world in a deep and meaningful way. The fund was the vehicle for that dream. It was our investment in a future we believed in. After Thomas passed, I had continued it myself. Every month, a portion of my modest pension, a slice of the dividends from the investments Thomas had left me, was quietly siphoned off into this fund. I had lived frugally. I had mended sweaters when I could have bought new ones. I had driven the same reliable car for 15 years. I had forgone trips and luxuries. Every small sacrifice was a deposit into Jessica's future, into the dream. I sat down and opened the folder. The most recent statement was on top at I looked at the number. $152,417. A number built of my quiet economies, my patient stewardship. It was a staggering amount, a testament to the quiet, cumulative power of a lifetime of love. But as I looked at that number, I no longer saw a university education. I saw designer handbags. I saw expensive gadgets. I saw a life that valued the wrapping paper far more than the gift inside. I saw a profound disconnect between the purpose for which the money was saved and the values of the person who would receive it. My journey that day was through those papers. I read the original documents Thomas and I had signed, his strong, confident signature next to my more delicate one. I read through years of annual statements, watching the number grow, a slow and steady testament to my diligence. It was like watching a time-lapse film of my own life, my own quiet, constant, background effort. I was not just a grandmother. I was a fund manager. I was the custodian of a legacy. And the evidence of the previous evening, Jessica's embarrassment, Richard's placating, the casual dismissal of a piece of our family's soul, was an auditor's report, stark and undeniable. It told me that the fund's beneficiary no longer aligned with the fund's core mission. The discovery I made, sitting there in the quiet of my study, was not that my granddaughter was ungrateful. That was a symptom, not the disease. The discovery was that my role had to change. I had been the silent provider, the background benefactor, assuming a shared set of values that simply did not exist. To continue to pour my finite resources, my money, my history, my love, into a vessel that was so clearly incapable of holding them would not be an act of love. It would be an act of negligence. I took the locket, the bracelet, and the earrings, and I placed them back in their velvet box. I closed the lid. Then, I placed the box on top of the financial statement, right next to the number that represented a small fortune. The past and the future, side by side. One was an inheritance of sentiment, the other an inheritance of cash. One had been rejected as embarrassing. The other was being taken for granted. I sat and looked at them together, the velvet box and the glossy paper. And I realized the journey of discovery was over. It was time for a new journey. The journey of correction. For a full week after Jessica's party, I did nothing. My silence was not one of hesitation, but of observation. I allowed the world to continue its spin, to see if the small, sharp moment at the party had left any ripple at all. It had not. There was no follow-up call from Richard to apologize for his daughter's rudeness. There was no awkward text message from Jessica. The incident had been smoothed over, managed, and filed away, as insignificant as a spilled drink that had been swiftly wiped from a polished floor. The quiet of my house felt less like loneliness and more like a laboratory, a controlled environment where I could examine the evidence without contamination. The intrusion came, as it always did, by telephone. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was in my garden, my hands deep in the soil, patiently teasing out the roots of a stubborn patch of weeds from around my prize-winning roses. My hands were stained with earth, and I felt a sense of profound, quiet satisfaction in the simple, honest work. The phone rang from inside the house, a shrill, insistent summons from a world I felt increasingly distant from. I sighed, pulled off my gloves, and went inside to answer it, wiping my hands on my apron. "Hello?" "Hi, Mom. It's Richard." His voice was cheerful, breezy, the sound of a man calling from his car, Bluetooth-enabled and multitasking. "Just wanted to touch base. We missed you at brunch on Sunday." There had been no formal invitation to brunch. There had been a casual, last-minute text from Catherine. "A brunch at the club. 11 if you can make it." It was an invitation designed to be missed, a gesture of inclusion that required no real effort. "I was busy in the garden," I said, looking out the window at my well-tended flower beds. The dahlias needed staking. Right, your garden." He said the words with a kind of fond, dismissive amusement, as if speaking of a quaint but ultimately trivial hobby. "Listen, the real reason I'm calling is about Jessica. Catherine and I have been talking. Now that she's 18, we think it's time to start the university application process in earnest. We're looking at hiring a top-tier college admissions consultant. They're pricey, but they get results. We were thinking of having Jessica apply to a few schools in the UK as well. Oxford, maybe St. Andrews. A global education is so important, you know." "None." He paused, clearly expecting an enthusiastic affirmation. I said nothing. I simply listened, my silence a vacuum into which he poured more of his plans. "Anyway," he continued, undeterred, "I was looking at the projected costs. It's astronomical, of course. But we've always had her education fund to fall back on. You've been so wonderful, managing it all these years. I'll need you to get in touch with the financial advisor. What's his name? Peterson? We'll need to start liquidating some of the assets to cover the consultant's retainer and the application fees for all these schools. It's quite a process." "Ma'am, I looked down at my hands. The dirt was ingrained in the lines of my palms, a map of my afternoon's labor. It felt more real than anything he was saying. He was speaking of liquidating assets, of retainers and fees. He spoke of the fund as if it were a corporate account, a convenient pool of capital to be drawn upon. He had no concept of the decades of frugality, the mended sweaters, the patient, quiet sacrifice that had built it. It was just a number on a page to him, a resource to be deployed. "Richard," I said, my voice calm and even. "I don't think that will be possible." The line went quiet. Not the quiet of a dropped signal, but the dense, heavy quiet of a mind hitting a brick wall. "What?" he said finally. "What do you mean, not possible? Is there an issue with the fund? Did the market take a hit?" "No," I said. "The fund is doing quite well. The issue isn't with the money. It's with the purpose of the money." I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, the confusion, the dawning irritation. The purpose is for Jessica's education. That's what we've always said. That's what it's for." "Is it?" I asked, my voice still gentle, but with a new, fine edge of steel. I thought the purpose was to invest in a certain kind of future. A future where a person would understand the value of things beyond their price tag. A future where a piece of our family's history, a gift given with love, wouldn't be dismissed as embarrassing. The silence was absolute now. I had connected the dots. I had taken the small, forgotten moment from the party and placed it directly in the center of this very important, very expensive conversation. I had shown him that the locket and the fund were inextricably linked. "Mom," he said, and his voice was low, tight with a carefully controlled anger. "You cannot be serious. You're going to hold a silly, childish comment against her. Against her entire future? She's a teenager. She says stupid things. It was a locket. A piece of old jewelry." "No, Richard," I said. "It was a test. I didn't intend for it to be, but that is what it became. And the results were very clear. The fund was created from a place of sentiment, history, and love. It was intended for a beneficiary who could appreciate those things. It seems I made a miscalculation. The inheritance I have to offer is not one she is interested in. The inheritance she's interested in is the one that will pay for her degree, he shot back, his frustration finally boiling over. This is insane. You're punishing her. No, I said, for what felt like the 100th time, my voice a quiet counterpoint to his rising anger. I am correcting my own mistake. I am realigning my investments. That is what a prudent fund manager does. I used his own language, the language of business and finance, and it seemed to disarm him completely. He was prepared to argue with a sentimental, emotional mother. He had no script for dealing with a prudent fund manager. I have to go, Richard, I said, my tone indicating the finality of the conversation. The roses need feeding. We can discuss it another time. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I stood there for a moment in the quiet kitchen, my heart beating a steady, calm rhythm. The old world had intruded, with its demands, its assumptions, its casual dismissal of everything I held dear. But it had found me changed. It had found me no longer a passive background presence, but an active chooser. I had not been hurt or angered by his call. I had been vindicated. The climax of my quiet revolution did not take place on a battlefield of angry words. It took place, as so many of the most important moments of my life had, in the quiet solitude of my own home, with a pen in my hand. A few days after my phone call with Richard, I knew what I had to do. The decision had crystallized, moving from an emotional reaction to a clear, logical course of action. I dressed that morning with a sense of ceremony, choosing a simple navy blue dress. I felt like a captain about to decommission a ship that had long been sailing in the wrong direction. I didn't call my financial advisor. That felt too impersonal. This was a decision that required a more personal touch. I drove into the city, to the familiar, glass and steel building where the investment firm had its offices. I had been there many times over the years with Thomas, and a few times since on my own. Mr. Peterson, my advisor, was a kind, steady man who had known my husband. He treated me with a gentle, slightly paternalistic respect, always explaining things in the simplest of terms, assuming, I think, that the world of finance was beyond my true comprehension. When I was shown into his office, with its panoramic view of the city, he greeted me with his usual warm, if slightly surprised, smile. Eleanor! What a pleasant surprise. I'm so used to our conversations on the phone. Is everything all right? Well, everything is perfectly fine, James, I said, taking the seat he offered. I just felt this particular matter required a face-to-face conversation. I reached into my handbag and produced the most recent statement for Jessica's education fund. I laid it on the polished surface of his desk. It's about this fund, I said. I would like to dissolve it. He blinked. He looked at the paper, then back at me, his smile faltering. Dissolve it? Eleanor, I'm not sure I understand. This fund has performed exceptionally well. It's a wonderful legacy for your granddaughter. Done. The performance of the fund is not in question, James, I said. My granddaughter, however, is. The beneficiary and the benefactor are no longer ideologically aligned. He stared at me, a deep frown creasing his brow. I had used a term, ideologically aligned, that he did not expect from the sweet old woman, who usually just nodded along to his explanations. I would like to liquidate the entire portfolio, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I want you to transfer the full cash value into my personal checking account. I understand there will be significant tax implications. I am prepared for that. Eleanor, he started, leaning forward, his voice taking on the soothing tone one might use with a skittish animal. This is a very drastic step. A fund of this size, liquidated all at once. The capital gains tax will be substantial. Are you sure you've thought this through? Perhaps you should discuss it with Richard and Catherine. I have thought it through, I said. And my discussions with Richard are precisely what have led me to this decision. This fund, James, was built on a dream. I dream of a certain kind of education, a certain kind of person. It seems the person and the dream are incompatible. To continue funding it would be irresponsible. For the first time, he looked at me not as a sweet elderly client, but as an individual. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He saw that my decision was not the product of a whim or a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, deliberate choice. His posture changed. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. He was no longer speaking to a confused old woman. He was speaking to a client who had given him a direct, unequivocal order. "Very well, Eleanor," he said, his voice now all business. "I will draw up the necessary paperwork for your signature." An hour later, I walked out of that building and onto the bustling city street. The sun was bright. The noise of the traffic, the chatter of the crowds, it all seemed very far away. I felt a profound sense of lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted from my shoulders, a weight I had carried for 18 years. I had not destroyed a dream. I had simply accepted that it was not mine to dream for someone else. That evening, back in my quiet house, I sat at my desk. The velvet box with the locket and its matching pieces was open before me. I took out my leather notebook. The page was blank. My hand did not hesitate. I knew what I had to write. It was my own personal declaration of independence, my new investment prospectus. Things I now understand about value. 1. Yon inheritance is not just money. It is a story, a history, a collection of values passed from one hand to the next. To accept the money while rejecting the story is not an inheritance. It is a withdrawal. Owned. 2. Love cannot be banked. It cannot be saved up and expected to accrue interest in someone else's heart. It must be valued and nurtured in the present. My love was an investment. Her indifference was the market telling me to sell. Embarrassing is a judgment. It is the assessment of an object or an action against a perceived social standard. I have spent too much of my life afraid of causing embarrassment. I see now that my history, my values, my quiet sacrifices are nothing to be embarrassed by. They are the core assets of my entire existence. 4. A gift is only a gift if it is received as such. If it is seen as an obligation, a burden, or a source of shame, it is simply a transaction that has failed. I will no longer engage in failed transactions. 5. This is not a punishment. It is a reallocation of assets. The primary beneficiary of my life's work, my quiet savings, and my remaining years will now be me. I will nest in my own garden, my own travels, my own peace of mind. And I will find a new beneficiary for the locket, someone who understands that its true value lies not in the silver, but in the story it holds. 1. I finished writing. I looked at the locket, gleaming softly in the lamplight. It was no longer a rejected gift. It was a compass. It had shown me the way back to myself. The climax of my life was not at the angry phone call, but in the quiet, resolute signing of a financial document, in the calm, steady scratching of a pen on a page. I had finally, truly taken ownership of my own inheritance. The check arrived a week later via bonded courier, a discreet man who required my signature in a small electronic device. It was a simple, business-sized envelope, but it felt impossibly heavy in my hand. Inside, the check was a pale green slip of paper, the color of new spring leaves. The number printed on it, the sum total of my 18-year dream for Jessica, was so large it seemed unreal, a string of zeros and commas that belonged in another world. I laid it on my kitchen table and simply looked at it. It was the material ghost of my past life, of my quiet sacrifices. Now, it was also the key to my future. I did not deposit it immediately. I let it sit on the table for a full day, a silent guest in my house. I needed to separate the object itself, the paper, the ink, from the complex web of love, disappointment, and duty it represented. By the next morning, it was no longer an emotional artifact. It was a tool. The weeks that followed were a quiet, joyful exploration of my own autonomy. My return was not to a family that now understood me, but to a self I was only just beginning to know. The first thing I did was not extravagant. It was practical. I called a contractor, a man recommended by a friend in my gardening club, and I had him build a small glass-walled conservatory onto the back of my house, opening off the kitchen. It was a simple, elegant structure, a room for sunlight and plants. As I watched the men work, digging the foundations, raising the glass panes, I felt a satisfaction so profound it was almost physical. I was not just building a room. I was building a space for my own peace, funded by the dissolution of a misplaced dream. I began to travel, not to the loud, flashy resorts Richard and Catherine favored, but to quiet places, places of history and natural beauty. I took a train trip through the Scottish Highlands, watching the mist-shrouded mountains slide past my window. I rented a small cottage for a month in the English countryside, in a village that looked like it had been lifted from the pages of one of my favorite novels. I walked for miles on ancient footpaths, my sturdy shoes crunching on the gravel, the air clean and sharp in my lungs. During these travels, my leather-bound notebook became my constant companion. I filled it not with a diary of events, but with observations, sketches of flowers, scraps of conversations overheard in a village pub. It was becoming a record of my own noticing, a testament to a life lived in the present tense. The inevitable confrontation with Richard came about 2 months after I had liquidated the fund. He didn't call. He appeared on my doorstep, unannounced, on a Sunday afternoon. I was in my new conservatory, repotting an orchid, my hands covered in soil. Through the glass, I saw his expensive car pull into my driveway. I saw him get out, his face set in a tight, angry mask. I did not rush to the door. I finished tamping the soil around the orchid's roots, watered it carefully, and wiped my hands on my apron. I opened the door just as he was raising his hand to knock. "Richard," I said calmly. "What a surprise." "I've been calling you for a week," he said, his voice clipped and furious as he brushed past me to the house. "You haven't been answering your phone." "I was in the Cotswolds," I said simply. The reception was spotty. He stopped in the middle of my living room, his eyes taking in the changes. New, comfortable armchairs, a beautiful watercolor of the Scottish coast hanging over the mantelpiece, the door to the new conservatory, through which the afternoon sun was streaming. "What is all this?" he asked, gesturing around the room with a sweep of his arm. "Where did all this come from?" "It's a reallocation of assets," I said, using the same term I had used with his financial advisor. I walked past him and sat in one of my new armchairs. It was exceedingly comfortable. "Please, sit down." He ignored the invitation. "I spoke to Peterson," he said, his voice dangerously low. "He told me what you did. You liquidated her entire education fund. All of it. The taxes alone. It's financial malpractice. How could you be so reckless? So vindictive?" "And it was not reckless," I said, my voice the quiet anchor in his storm of fury. "It was the most calculated decision I have ever made, and it was not vindictive. It was practical. The fund was an investment, Richard. It was contingent on a certain return. Not a financial return, but a return of shared values, of respect. The investment was not performing, so I moved my capital elsewhere. "Your capital," he sputtered, his face flushing a deep red. "That was Jessica's money. Dad and you set that up for her." "None. Your father and I set up a dream," I corrected him gently. "A dream that our granddaughter would grow into a woman who understood that the ugliest word in the English language is not a curse word. It is the word cheap when applied to a gift of love. Jessica and, I'm sorry to say, you and her mother taught me that my dream was just that, a dream. It had no basis in reality, so I let it go, and I took the capital." I patted the arm of my comfortable chair. "In my own peace, in my own joy." He stared at me, utterly speechless. He was a man who solved every problem with money, who understood the world through the lens of finance. I had taken that language and used it to explain a decision that was rooted in something he could no longer comprehend: sentiment. He was a fish, flailing on a riverbank, unable to breathe the air of my new world. "So that's it," he finally managed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and defeat. "Her future? You've just thrown it away over a piece of jewelry?" "Oh no," I said softly, and I stood up, went to my desk, and picked up the small velvet box. I opened it and took out the locket. It seemed to glow in the afternoon light. Her future is her own responsibility, as it should be. She has a father who is more than capable of providing for her education, if he so chooses. He had no answer. The anger seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a hollowed-out confusion. He looked at the locket, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. Not as his mother, the reliable, background utility, but as a woman with her own history, her own values, her own unshakable sense of worth. Our relationship did not magically heal in that moment. It was not fixed, but it was, for the first time, honest. He left my house that day a different man than the one who had arrived. The comfortable certainty of his world had been shaken. I did not see him for another month. But one afternoon, a small package arrived. A simple, brown paper-wrapped box. Inside was a beautifully crafted wooden case, lined with velvet, with small custom-made indentations. On a small handwritten card, in Richard's awkward scrawl, were 2 words: A for the story. Entrain. I took the locket, the bracelet, and the earrings, and I laid them in their new, beautiful home. It was not an apology. It was not a solution. But it was an acknowledgement. A sign that he had perhaps finally begun to understand the difference between price and value. My journey was not over, but I had found my true north. I sat in my sun-filled conservatory, a cup of tea in my hand, my notebook open on my lap. I was the fund manager of my own life now, and I was finally investing in a future that I knew, without a doubt, would give me the richest possible returns.